So what I want to share today is the work that I've been doing with this feminist urban planning cooperative as a practitioner in the last 15 years. And also I went first to share a little bit what's the kind of like framework from where we work, or areas of specialization, to later deep dive a little bit more on the field of mobility and transportation, that it has been my focus in the cooperative in the last 10 years since I graduated from my PhD. So a little bit more about who we are. So Collective Punt, as Luisa was explaining, is a nonprofit cooperative. Right now we are 7 diverse women, architects, sociologists, and urban planners. We've been working since 2005 to integrate an intersectional feminist perspective in urban planning and mobility projects. We are based in Barcelona, but over these 20 years, we have had the opportunity to work in more than 100 cities, not only in Catalonia and Spain, but also in the region of Latin America and the Mediterranean, due to our diverse origins from the cooperative, but also our migrating experiences. And also we have created a lot of networks with other feminist organizations in these regions. We are a nonprofit cooperative. We are not a private firm, and we are part of the social and solidarity economy by commitment. So 100% of the income, of our income, comes from public projects, either from in form of contracts with public institutions or through grants, and we develop both bottom-up community projects as well as projects directly with public institutions. We have specialized above all in feminist participatory planning, and this has given us the opportunity to engage and learn with more than 10,000 women and gender minorities, which has been a bless. So, oh, sorry, this is not moving. Now? No, this is not moving. I don't know what's going on. Now, okay, it was slow. I want to start first giving a little bit of political context to the work that we do, but also to explain why we have such a weird name, what our name is Collective Point 6. In 2004, before we started to work as a collective, the Catalan government enacted the neighborhood law that provided funding for municipalities to develop projects for improving neighborhoods, urban areas, and cities that require social attention. The point 6 of the law mandated to integrate a gender perspective in the projects, particularly gender equity in the use of urban spaces and public facilities that were going to be designed through these projects. This was the first law, not only in the Catalonia, but also Spain, and we believe also in the European level, to mandate a gender perspective in urban planning. This happened also thanks to the feminist activists that were in the government at that time. That was a 3-party progressive coalition that allowed us. So when we started to work as a collective, we chose the point 6 as our name. So that's the funniest story. In addition to this legislation, other legislation was developed afterwards in the country, the Spanish gender equality, also the gender equality in Catalonia, and both obligating to integrate a gender perspective in all public policies, including urban planning and mobility, and giving specific recommendations for including that in those areas. Also, Spain and Catalonia has a strong history of feminist movement in the streets, but also in the institutions. And this has paved our way to be, right now, the leading group of feminist urban planning in the country and the region. So I wanted also to contextualize that and acknowledge the ones that have previous our work. Okay. Through our work, we contest the historical and still current capitalist, patriarchal, and colonial planning model that continues being replicated based on a standardized citizen type, privileging productivity and land consumption, growth without limits, and reproducing a toxic, unequal, ethnocentric, and colonial model. This is not moving. In contrast, we work towards integrating 3 objectives of feminist urban planning in our practice. First, to change priorities to place people's everyday life at the center and care at the center in all urban decisions, and we work towards a model of the caring city. Second, we work on safety and autonomy from an intersectional feminist perspective to transform spaces and cities safe for all and free from gender-based violence and other hate crimes, guaranteeing women's and gender minorities' rights to the city. And third, we work on feminist participatory planning, increasing women's and gender minorities' participation in all their diversity in planning processes and decision-making. So through the years, we have specialized in advocating for the diversification of the planning knowledge, for valuing and integrating qualitative data in projects through transformative participatory planning. For us, feminist urbanism is not a topic, it's not a comma that we add to a project. It's a political standpoint, and it's our epistemology and the way to be in this world at the personal level and also as a professional level. So we have developed feminist participatory methodologies in specific and contextual projects, but with the flexibility to be adapted to different territories and projects. And as part of our view that the knowledge is collective and accumulative, we have to systematize all this knowledge in more than 10 methodological guides that include conceptual frameworks, methods, as well as planning criteria and recommendations in different areas such as public spaces, nighttime planning, education infrastructures, housing, and mobility. In these guides and through our participatory planning perspective, we use feminist methods which are embodied, mobile, and special methods, and which allow us to gather qualitative data at different scales, from the body, the street, the household, the community, the neighborhood, the city, the community, the territory, and so on. We use tools such as body mapping, everyday life and community mapping, also exploratory walks. And all these methods gather the rich knowledge from the individual to the community level that women and gender minority have about their territories due to the still double and triple shift that we continue carrying out in our society. So after this introduction to kind of the work that we do, I'm going to move to mobility and transportation, an area of work that continue being highly male-dominated and gender and race-blind. The contribution of our work to this field has been advocating for changing the mobility paradigm in planning practice and public policies to integrate an intersectional feminist perspective approach in the different phases of mobility planning, from capacity building, data gathering, analysis, and also making recommendations. You'll see that one of the contributions has been to achieve the qualitative data is valued and integrated in mobility studies through feminist participatory planning, but also that quantitative data gathering and analysis should be transformed to integrate this perspective in order to design mobility and transportation policies that really respond to people's everyday lives, needs, and desires. And I'm not talking from the university that probably there is a lot of studies about that, but when you go to practice and you go to work with transportation departments, this is still the situation that we often found. So why we need then an intersectional feminist perspective in mobility? Well, because mobility plans and policies have been developed from an androcentric, patriarchal, and capitalist perspective, ignoring and minimizing women's needs, despite we are 51% of the population, and despite we have consolidated sustainable mobility patterns. Transportation policies historically have focused on the infrastructure and the objects that move people, more than in responding to the needs of people that move daily. And this has made the field of mobility and transportation blind to many social issues, and in particular, it has been a gender and race-blind field. Still today, in most cities and territories, we continue planning mobility from an androcentric and capitalist perspective, which means that mobility has planned based on this first view that we see here on the graphic, mobility patterns of a standardized citizen, which has been associated with a white, middle-class, fully able man with a full-time job that moves mostly by car and alone from home to work, focusing on an individual, linear, and unimodal mobility system, relying on non-disaggregated quantitative data, therefore not knowing the gender mobility differences between women, men, and non-binary people, and ignoring the needs of the 51% of the population who are women, as well as people of color, LGBT communities, people with disabilities, and also those people who are not in the group of adult or productive according to the capitalist system. So we've been planning mobility for a privileged minority, ignoring the complex and diverse mobility of the majority of the population. But feminist studies in the last decades have documented that women worldwide have a more sustainable and complex mobility than men. In most urban contexts, we move mostly by foot or public transportation, while men use more cars and motorized vehicles in general. Women have also a more complex mobility. We trip chain and combine activities of paid work with care tasks, since we continue developing most unpaid and domestic activities in the whole world. We travel closer to home and use different modes of transport. However, our mobility system has penalized the way that we move and has privileged male motorized mobility. In the current androcentric model, we encounter a walking, a cycling, and a public transport mobility system that does not respond to the mobility of care and makes women's life more difficult because we have to invest more extra time in moving between activities since the schedules among different modes of transport are not coordinated. But also we face many accessibility barriers that impact not only people with disabilities, but also all those caretakers that, for example, with children, with the strollers accompanying elder people. In addition, oftentimes we face more challenges to cover the cost of transportation, and we experience gender-based violence and other hate crimes such as racism and LGBTI phobia when we move. We also receive health impacts from the normative male-centric male car-centric mobility because we are more impacted by car pollution for being the walkers and not the drivers, but also because physiologically women absorb faster certain pollutants that impact directly in health problems such as cardiovascular diseases and some type of cancer. All these penalties combined with a lack of representation of women in the mobility sector, from management to operation. Now, let me justify all this theory that I'm throwing here to you with some data, okay? So I'm going to share some data, quantitative and qualitative, from the context where I come from. That is what I know better in Barcelona. So let's start about everyday life data and mobility of care. Since 2006, the province of Barcelona has conducted a yearly survey on mobility that gathers gender disaggregated data, also by type of trips and mode of transport and other variables. So data has consistently illustrated that care mobility trips are much higher than commuting to work trips, and above all, among women. Also, in the province, most trips are made on sustainable mobility, above all, among the women. 74% of the trips that women make are made walking or in public transport. If we compare it to men, they also use more sustainable mobility, but they rely more than women in motorized mobility. Also, when we look at data of transport users, we see that women represent 70% of bus users and 60% of the subway of tram users. But we look at the cities in the province, which is not that different than here, and still 70% of the public space is dedicated to cars. Also, we look at the transport sector, as I say, and we are a minority. We represent only 20% of the workforce. And if we look at the decision-making positions, women only represent 60%. So we are the ones that have sustainable mobility patterns, the ones that do more care mobility, but we are not at the table deciding how to plan mobility. So these were some quantitative data. Let me take you to the ground and everyday life of women and share with you some specific examples that came from some of our projects. So these cases are going to show how in practice mobility fails to respond to sustainable mobility of women who work in the care sector. So we start with Juana. Juana is not appearing, but will appear one moment. Okay, if not, yes. Juana is a care worker. It's Tuesday, 3 p.m. Juana returns home to Barcelona from a suburb in a metropolitan municipality where she works as a caregiver for an elderly person. She has to leave on time because at 3:05 p.m., the only bus of that hour leaves, taking her to the train station where she can take a train and a metro to get home. If she misses that bus, she walks 3 kilometers to get the train. By public transport, it takes an hour and a half to get home. By car, it would have taken 30 minutes. Let's move to another example. Karina, who is a night worker, cleaning stuff at the hospital. So Karina leaves work one Friday at 5 a.m., leaves from her cleaning job at the hospital in Hospitalet de Llobregat, which is a neighboring city in Barcelona, and prepares to return home, which is located 4 kilometers from work in Cornellà, both municipalities in the Barcelona metropolitan area. It takes Karina more than an hour to commute, since to connect her work with her neighborhood, she has to take a metro line and a night bus. But to take the night bus, she has to enter the city of Barcelona, take the bus, and go back to the metropolitan area. By car, she has taken 10 minutes. She spends more than an hour to go back to work after night shift. During her journey, Karina travels in the first car of the metro, close to the driver's cabin, for fear of sexual harassment and violence. So it's extensively documented the impact of fear in mobility, particularly in walking mobility, showing that women have unsafe perceptions when moving at night, but also we have started to gather in different regions of the world, and also in Barcelona, how also sexual violence impacts the use of public transport. So in Barcelona in 2020, we did the first survey that documented that 57% of women public transport users have experienced at least in the last 2 years, a situation of sexual harassment. If we look at the sample of the young women between 16 and 25, it was reported in more than 90% of this group of people. And also we documented that harassers are mostly adults that travel alone. So we also did that for cycling mobility, that not many people gather this data, in Barcelona and in other cities of Spain in 2023. And around 50% of women cyclists in Barcelona and other cities in Spain report to have experienced gender-based harassment when cycling. We have also documented through safety audits in mobility infrastructures, using exploratory walks and routes, cycling, and in public transport, how safety perceptions condition women's mobility in their cities at different times of the day. From this work, we have found also some examples of the barriers that we encounter, and I can share you also some kind of testimonies and qualitative data that we have encountered. So first, we start with Magda. Okay, I think I have to show you all of them, because if not, it doesn't appear on the screen. No, let's go back. Well, I'll read it. Magda is a public transport user. Actually, she was a participant in one of the focus groups with a project that I'm going to present with the subway and bus company. She is deaf signing, and she explains to us that the SOS and help system that are in the subway system, it's not accessible for deaf people, because only works with sound. So the SOS buttons only work with audio and do not have a system that allows you to communicate in case of emergency. So that limits also her mobility at certain times of the day because of fear and the lack of getting assistance. The second case is Sonia. Okay, here. Sonia, who is a young woman who lives in a metropolitan city next to Barcelona and who likes to go out at night, as many young people. She stopped going out at night because her only affordable mode of transport was the metro, not an old one. It was a new line, the L9, which is very modern, but you can only access the line taking an elevator 6th floor down. You arrive to the platform, there is no personnel in the station, and also the metro works automatically. So she stopped using that, as many other women in the neighborhood, because they feel afraid of who's going to find on the subway. She went out at night again when the night bus service started a request stop night service, as you have here in Canadian cities, that allows her to get off 100 meters from home. And finally, also through the studies that we have done with public transport operators, we have found also how sexism and gender discrimination is directly related with issues of racism. For example, the case of Patty. She's a migrant woman working as a domestic worker in the high-income neighborhoods of Barcelona, and she combines work in different houses from Monday through Saturday without an employment contract. She lives in a neighborhood of a neighboring city 3 kilometers from her work. She moved by bus and metro depending on her ability to pay for her transport tickets. Added to the economic precariousness of Patty, she fears racial profiling documentation checks that police regularly carry out at the stop near her home. Patty has been moving by foot lately, investing more time and fatigue in her travels. So all these testimonies are essential to document and make visible also when we are analyzing and we are thinking of the policies that we are doing in order to respond to the diverse issues and problems that people face when moving, but particularly women who are the most impacted and who also are the ones that still restricts their access to opportunities because of these mobility barriers. So let me move now to some particular examples of mobility projects after giving you kind of like some data and some contextualization of why it's important to integrate this perspective in mobility and transportation. I want to give examples of how we have integrated an intersectional gender perspective in mobility plans, but also how we have done it by doing gender audits conducted with public transport operators. And then I'll finish with a couple of examples of how we have used also this perspective in mobility studies where we have used mixed methods. But before presenting these projects that are like directly done with public institutions, a little bit top down, we have, I want to make a specific recognition that this work that I'm going to present has been possible thanks to the results and impact of feminist participatory action research that we conducted in the metropolitan area of Barcelona. So between 2005 and 2018, we developed a feminist participatory action research with 24 co-researchers who were women night shift workers from different sectors and working and living in different cities of the metropolitan area. And this study made visible for the first time, I would say, in the region, nighttime planning and everyday life mobility at the metropolitan area. So for the first time, through feminist participatory action research and community-based research, we proved that it is possible to incorporate qualitative and participatory action research methods in urban planning policies, from an intersectional feminist perspective. We were able to collect qualitative contextual mobility data at different scales, documented data that impacted the body, the household, the neighborhood, the city, and the metropolitan region. We documented also how women night shift workers have detailed knowledge about how the mobility and transportation systems work. For example, highlighting reduced frequency, irregular service, poor multimodal connections, mobility that is focused on the connections with the main cities, but not among the metropolitan cities around, and also elements that contribute to their perception of fear. So the study also documented that women still have a sustainable mobility even at night and with all these barriers, particularly working class women, sex workers, and the migrant women that work or researchers. One of the actions of the research is that we decided that we wanted to disseminate as much as possible the results and make visible these issues. So the results were disseminated among the general public, but also we got a lot of media attention in TV and press media. And both media coverage, but also presentations with municipal and regional planners opened the door to start working on projects directly with transportation authorities. So I want to say that the projects that I'm going to present come from community action. And I think also to give like a more positive note to the presentation that I'm giving. So we are being able to work with mobility authorities in the province of Barcelona, for example, in integrating a gender perspective and gender criteria in the master mobility plan that was just finished in 2025, in the infrastructure plan that lasts until 2030, as well as developing a guide to accompany the development of municipal mobility plans that I'll talk a little bit about it. We also work with the city of Buenos Aires in 2020 and the Latin American Bank CAF to produce a methodological guide for planning mobility from a gender perspective. So in these plans, we've been able to integrate 10 gender criteria from the analysis and assessment of mobility networks to draft and elaborate recommendations and proposals of actions in mobility plans. So these criteria advocate for mobility systems that combine both social and physical criteria to integrate on mobility plans. So let me go through very briefly through these criteria to get a little bit like a hint of what we are talking about. So we advocate in this criteria, we need to analyze mobility beyond commute to work, making visible and prioritizing care mobility, which is higher than work mobility, as you've seen, above all among women. That also mobility has to work on safety and autonomy by addressing gender-based violence that impact women, as well as the differentiated perceptions of safety people have when they move, but also integrated a gender perspective in road safety. We also need to address night and weekends mobility, because we plan cities during the day, and as one of the co-researchers saying, the streets don't close at night. And we need to adapt also the mobility network to the everyday, every night activities and those that continue happening on weekends and holidays. Mobility has to be participatory and equitable mobility to advance towards gender equity in the sector and ensure women's participation and knowledge on the development of plans. And also going to the more physical criteria, it has to be equipped, ensuring that mobility networks is accompanied by everyday life infrastructure, such as benches, public toilets, spaces of rest and care, equipped bus shelters with real-time information, lighting, space to sit, and a space to protect from the weather. Things that seems very simple, but often don't exist. It has to be visible to ensure to be see and be seen, to perceive and be perceived in terms of lighting, but also eliminating visual barriers and obstacles or using transparent materials. We have to work also in make mobility signposted to ensure wayfinding for pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport. We have cities with a lot of wayfinding for cars, but not for the people who move. And this is important to know where you are and where to go and make informed mobility decisions and reduce travel time. Mobility, of course, has to be accessible to respond to the needs of people with different mobilities and disabilities, physical, sensorial, and cognitive, as well as different health situations. Has to be vital to favor the presence and movement of people that make spaces alive, where people can find support and help if needed. And it has to be informally surveyed through the presence of simultaneous activities on the ground floor, such as stores or public facilities that accompany mobilities and waiting times, but also they can offer services of information and support and help. As I say, these 10 criteria have been integrated in several plans. And also, we've been able to, I want to emphasize that it's been key also the guide that where we integrated these criteria to develop municipal mobility plans. And also because it's been very well received and it has a lot of potentials. In the case above all of small and medium-sized municipalities that they cannot afford to pay like a survey with a representative sample of the community, using the guide to integrate participatory qualitative methods with an intersectional feminist perspective can allow the municipality to collect data which is grounded and contextualized in their context, and then kind of like develop actions in the mobility plans that are more attuned and more adequate for the people who live there. So for example, this is the case of a little municipality of 3,000 inhabitants. Its name is Moya. It's the capital of a county in the center of Catalonia, where we were able to do a lot of participatory activities with adolescents, with families with kids, with autism, expert talks with women, with people with disabilities, but also we did group interviews with migrant women from Mali. There was a big community in this town, or with care workers from elder care homes, as well as with other mobility maps with other community organizations. And actually, it was very helpful for the municipality because it gives a very rich information that they can later adapt the actions of the particular plan for the mobility of this territory. All right. So moving to more examples. I'm going to finish soon, I hope. So now I want to give a couple of examples of practical projects that we have done more in the service and infrastructure field of transportation, okay? So over the past 10 years, we've worked with most of the public transport operators of Catalonia to conduct several gender audits of their infrastructure and service. And we've been able to integrate also in these audits qualitative methods such as focus groups and exploratory walks of mobility mapping. And the good news is that the examples that I'm presenting you are not sitting in a cabinet, I think. These operators have taken seriously, and they are applying some of the recommendations that come from these processes. So I want to share only a couple of examples. One that we did with the Bus and Subway Company of Barcelona, which is called TMB, the equivalent to TTC, okay, where we were approached by the Accessibility and Wayfinding Department, and they asked us to do a gender audit. So over the period of 6 months, we conducted this gender audit with a lot of hours of participatory observation, where we analyzed the different scales of subway and bus stations, from the surrounding of the entrance, the connectors, the platforms, the trains, the buses. Also, we were able to conduct 5 in-depth interviews with department directors, also to know how they feel about integrating this perspective in those issues. We did 2 focus groups, one with women with disabilities, when one of the testimonies participated, and one with women workers that work at the TMB system. And also we did 2 exploratory walks, one in the bus system and another in the subway system. So we got a lot of information and recommendations of things that were good, that the system was working well about, and things that can be improved in terms of signage, wayfinding, visibility, accessibility, equipment, vitality, safety. That happened around 2019, 2020. You know, applications transformations that are physical take a little bit of time. But we are glad that the company took some of these recommendations, and actually we have started to see in the last 2 years some of the changes. For example, they have made changes in terms of visibility and accessibility in connectors that were not connected with an accessible, for example, elevator, but also that were like presenting issues of visibility and perception of safety. And also another recommendation is that they had some good wayfinding in some parts of the system, but not in the full chain. So they have improved a lot the signage and wayfinding from the entrance of the subway until to get on the car of the subway. And now when you are about to exit the car, you really know which exit you have to take to connect with other bus service, metro, access the elevator, etc. So they've improved a lot, that too. And also they are taking seriously the issue of addressing sexual violence in the system. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, doing some protocols and also having coordinated response to that. Another project, also in transportation, more like focus on bus, is one of my favorites. This was like a 2-year project where we were asked to accompany a group of women engineers working on the Metropolitan Bus Agency, who they were decided that they want to work from a feminist perspective inside the organization, but also in the bus service that they provide. So the Barcelona metropolitan area manages the metropolitan bus system. So with this group that is called the Feminist View, we developed a 2-year study and an action plan where we conducted exploratory walks, exploratory routes in 6 bus lines with women's bus users, that women represent 70% of bus users in this system, women and gender minorities. We also did 2 participatory observations in the night buses line, which are the ones that have the request to stop at night. And also we review secondary data. So we were able to work together with this team in really analyzing the data and having like meaningful actions in an action plan based in 3 strategies: improving bus stops, accessibility, and the surroundings of bus shelters. Also, improving the distribution of the interior of the bus to guarantee comfortability for diverse bodies, because we're analyzing how were the seats, how were the buttons to ask for a stop, things like that. and also improves bus service and schedules responding to everyday life mobility and care mobility, which that requires money, but actually they have started to implement some of these actions. For example, in the last 2 years, so that happened until 2023, and they have continued working. Now they have expanded the request stop service in the whole system, in all the lines of metropolitan lines of the night system. They have improved the information and the communication of how it works, because a lot of people didn't know that that exists. We were able to accompany them also in drafting a training guide for bus operators, in helping them get training on how to integrate a gender perspective, gender-based violence, and other hate violence perspective prevention in their work, from bus drivers to the people who manage the system. Also, we accompany them on thinking on a communication campaign that was able to say the bus is also ours, and stop abuse, which is at the bus, stop abuse, that's the campaign. And also they have started doing like some improvement on lines, in increasing the schedules in certain lines that were problematic, and also improving some elements of the bus shelters. All right. And to finish, I've been critical about quantitative data, or we are very participatory and qualitative, but I want also to share that we also do some work which is quantitative, and that we thought that we also can do contributions to that. So on the last years, we have had also the great opportunity to participate in mixed methods mobility studies, where we've been able to integrate an intersectional approach in sociodemographic data, to also in kind of like intervene on which questions we have to do in the questionnaire to address mobility of care, and also gender-based violence and other hate violence that happens in the public transport system. Also advocating for valuing the importance of training people who are going to be the surveyors in the field work of how to do this work, talking about these topics, as well as integrating a feminist perspective in the analysis of data, because you have to do it in the whole thing. Oftentimes we have a lot of data disaggregated by many variables, but people don't analyze it. So if we don't use this perspective, it's difficult to get to results. So also these studies, we have been able to value qualitative data and to use mixed methods. So I'm going to share a fancy or like a well-funded study that we did with funds of the European Investment Bank, actually with the TMB company, the sister of the TTC. Collective Punt was in charge of doing the field work of this project that was coordinated by Florida Comon. She's also like a PhD in planning and has done a lot of work in transportation. So the goal was to address sexual harassment and discrimination against women and girls and the LGBTQ community on public transport, with a focus on the bus and the subway services. So we did the field work for this project with 1,500 surveys, a sample of women and non-binary people, and also with 25 in-depth interviews with intersectional profiles. And we were able now here to intervene in which profiles we were going to interview, as well to review the questionnaire, integrate intersectionality. We were not only adding the non-binary to the gender, which that was tough for our context, but also asking if people were part of the LGBT community, if they identify as racialized, migrant, and many other variables. And that was one of the first that we were able to do that. But also one of the things that I'll explain in the last project, what was important also is the feminist team that we created and the feminist strategy, because also we were providing training and ethics of care and support to the team of surveyors that were in the field asking these difficult questions. So let me show a little bit of the results that are going to appear also all, because if not, okay, I'm gonna tell them. So the studies show that 60%, 67% of the users of the subway and bus system are women. And from those, almost 63%, okay, now 63% reported they have lived some type of harassment in the last 3 years or discrimination. If you look at the sample of the LGBTQ people, they reported 95% of cases of harassment and discrimination. Also, since it was paid by the European Investment Bank, they were very interesting to do the cost-benefit analysis of what was the impact of this violence. So 19% of the survivors reduced public transport use. So they calculated that this reduction represented 26.3 million euros per year for the TMB company. And then 28% of survivors would stop using public transport if they have an alternative mode. And they also calculated that if that happened, they potentially will lose 54 million euros. I think we have to work on these issues, not only for the money, but I think that it was interesting also to put like some numbers over there. So we were able to conduct 25 intersectional interviews with diverse women, LGBTQ, with disabilities, migrant, Black, Arab, and Latino communities, and all mixed, because intersectionalities works like that, not separately. And actually, we got also a lot of information that was very useful and demystifying some safety prevention strategies that have been used before. That bus is perceived more accessible, safe, and visible than the subway, that women and non-binary people experience intersectional discriminations, also the reluctancy that have to report these experiences for fear of being rejected by operators or the police, but also lack of intervention from other passengers. And we were asking also for recommendations of what they would like to see to prevent, to report. And basically, they were talking about the implementation of alert devices such as SEOs buttons, mobile apps to report more presence of personnel, more than increased police presence and CCTV systems that for most of them, these were considered systems that are ineffective and disruptive. So I think that was important because there is a trend to increase police presence and CCTV systems in order to respond to safety. So I want to share also that we have done that, taking this strategy to the first national study on cycling mobility from a feminist perspective in Spain, where we combine a survey with more than 2,000 people, cyclists and not cyclists, men, women, and non-binary people, with data from 6 focus groups on small cities in the country. But also, I want to recognize that this national study was not developed by chance or by serendipity. Before the Ministry of Equality of the country asked to conduct this study, we have developed a 5-year study on cycling mobility with women and non-binary people in the city of Barcelona that combined data from an online survey and also from participatory activities, from workshops to bike routes. And this was a community-based study conducted in coordination with other feminist cycling organizations. And the results were used to advocate for integrating these perspectives also in cycling policies and infrastructure. So this previous activist study happened like the nocturnas in the nighttime, preceded also the official national study that we developed in 2023 for the Ministry of Equality in coordination with the network of urban cycling organizations in Spain. That actually, the results of the study show things that we have been collected in Barcelona and in other cities, that there is a gender gap on bike use due to the lack of a complete, protected, and segregated cycling network, because still there is an impact of safety perceptions and road harassment in women use of bikes. Also, we documented the difficulties to develop mobility of care with the cycle system that we have, and also that gender-based harassment was reported by 45% of the cyclists. Overall, it was higher, more than 50% in urban areas, and also that this violence was worse against LGBTQ community, migrant women, and single moms. Okay, I'm getting to the end. Finally, I'm really excited to finish my presentation sharing the project that has accompanied me during my Bousfield stay here in Toronto. We are currently developing a study on sexual violence in public transport by the Latin American Observatory of Gender Mobility, which started in Santiago, Chile, and now integrates 8 cities of the region, and with funds of the Latin American Bank CAF in 8 cities of the region. So we are doing comparative studies in the cities of Mexico City, San Jose, Costa Rica, Bogota, Quito, Lima, La Paz, Santiago, Chile, Buenos Aires, with the same sample in every city, 1,200 surveys per city, with a total of 9,600 surveys with women and gender minorities. We are also conducting mobile ethnographies, 3 intersectional profiles in each city with a total of 24, kind of like following the mobilities of a day of trans women, women with disabilities, indigenous women, Afro-descendant, different profiles depending on the city. And also we are conducting focus group with adolescent girls because we know that a lot of the harassment happened with the youngers, and it's like also a question of age and power. Also one in each city. So again, like it happened in the study with TMB, here it's been very important, the feminist team that we have created with a feminist strategy. I've been honored to coordinate this project with Paula Soto Villagran, who is a researcher at the Autonomous University of Mexico, specialized in gender and mobility and care mobility. And together we decided that to do this project as close as possible to the cities and to the realities, that we need to create like local teams. So we have 8 local teams. In each city, there is 1 or 2 local coordinators who are researchers of one local university, and they have hired 10 women who are surveyors for each city. And also, we have been very careful in taking care of these teams at the local level. We have conducted trainings on gender mobility with the teams with the local teams, also on how to survey on issues of gender-based violence in a region, as you know, that gender-based violence is in high rates in public transport, but also in public space and in other spaces. So we are right now finalizing this week and early next week field work. In the next months, we are going to be focusing on analyzing and writing the final reports that will be presented in September. And even though the results are going to be a little bit frightening, I think these projects are very, very important to make visible the issues that women face in different places in the world in order to also make informed decisions about the things that we have to plan in the future. And this is all. I'm going to finish here. I hope I've been able to inspire some of you in these turbulent times when we feel a little bit hopeless. I still believe that we only have one way out, is to continue working for a more just world. And for me, that means that we have to continue advocating for more feminist urban planning. So thank you very much for your attention.